Buying your freehold sounds like the definitive and permanent solution to every leasehold problem. No more ground rent, no more service charge controlled by a freeholder with misaligned interests, no more permission required for alterations, no more escalating lease extension costs as the term shortens. In practice, a freehold purchase can go wrong in ways that leave the buyers in a worse or more complicated position than they were as leaseholders, and a meaningful number of freehold purchases that complete on paper don't deliver the clean, autonomous ownership that buyers expected. The problems range from legal complexities that weren't fully resolved before completion to shared freehold structures that simply replace one set of management problems with another, to freehold acquisitions that didn't actually cover the full extent of the building the buyers thought they were acquiring. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the 5 specific ways a freehold purchase can still go wrong, what to check before committing, and how to ensure the freehold you buy actually delivers what you and your fellow leaseholders expect it to. I've been tracking the UK property market for years, and the freehold purchase process is one of those areas where the gap between the expectation and the reality catches buyers who didn't fully understand what they were buying. Let's get into it. It's worth framing the scale of this conversation. Collective enfranchisement, where leaseholders buy their freehold together, has been available as a statutory right since 1993, and a growing number of leaseholder groups are exercising it as awareness has grown and as leasehold reform has pushed the topic up the property agenda. The appeal is straightforward and often entirely justified, but the number of freehold purchases that complete without the buyers having fully understood the problems described below is significant, and the consequences of those misunderstandings accumulate over years of post-completion management rather than appearing immediately at the point of purchase. Before going through the specific ways things go wrong, it's worth being clear about what a freehold purchase actually involves for a group of leaseholders buying collectively. The most common route is the statutory right to collective enfranchisement under the Leasehold Reform Act, which gives qualifying leaseholders the legal right to compel the freeholder to sell the freehold at a price determined by a statutory valuation formula. The process involves serving notices, obtaining valuations, negotiating a price, and completing a legal transfer. Alongside the statutory route, freeholders sometimes offer voluntary sales, and in some cases the freehold is acquired through the right to manage process being extended into a full purchase. Each of these routes has its own procedural requirements, its own timetable, and its own potential complications, and the specific failure modes described below can arise in any of them. Problem number 1, the valuation dispute that extends the process and inflates the cost. Collective enfranchisement requires agreement on a price for the freehold, calculated according to a statutory formula that accounts for the ground rent, the lease length, the property values, and a number of other factors that specialist surveyors on each side of the transaction frequently assess differently. When the leaseholder surveyor and the freeholder surveyor produce valuations that differ significantly, which is common in complex buildings with substantial ground rents or complicated lease structures, the gap must be resolved either by negotiation or by application to the first-tier tribunal. The tribunal process takes time, typically months, during which the purchaser is in limbo and legal and professional costs continue to accumulate. Leaseholders who budgeted for the surveyor's initial estimate of the freehold cost often discover that the final agreed price is considerably higher and that the professional costs of the dispute have added further to the total expenditure. The freehold purchase that was supposed to cost each flat owner £15,000 can end up costing £25,000 or more per flat by the time legal fees, surveyor's fees, and a higher than expected negotiated price are factored in. Leaseholders who committed to the process on the basis of an initial surveyor estimate without understanding that the estimate represented the lower end of a range rather than a reliable prediction of the final cost are the ones most likely to find the total cost of the purchase has stretched beyond what they had budgeted, at a point in the process where withdrawing is more expensive than completing. Problem number 2, the incomplete or defective title that creates ongoing complications. When leaseholders buy a freehold, they receive title to the land and building above what their individual leases already cover. In some cases, the freeholder's title to the freehold is itself incomplete, encumbered by old charges or covenants that were never properly dealt with, or subject to easements or rights that affect how the building can be managed or developed. A freehold with a ransom strip, an access arrangement that isn't properly documented, or a historic covenant that restricts the building's use in unexpected ways can create ongoing problems for the new freeholder that didn't exist as a leaseholder, because the leaseholder's liability for these title issues was limited while the freeholder's is direct. Buyers who don't conduct rigorous title investigation before completing the freehold purchase can acquire complications they weren't aware of and weren't properly advised about. The specific risk here is that leaseholders focus focused on the goal of getting the freehold, sometimes treat the legal due diligence as a formality rather than as the substantive investigation it needs to be, and solicitors handling a high volume of enfranchisement work don't always flag every title complication with the prominence it deserves when clients are enthusiastic to proceed.
Problem number 3, the shared freehold management problem. When a group of leaseholders buys a freehold collectively, they typically hold it through a company in which each flat owner has a share. That company becomes the freeholder, and the company's directors, typically some or all of the leaseholders themselves, become responsible for all the management obligations that the previous freeholder held. Building insurance, major works planning, maintenance decisions, service charge setting, compliance with building safety obligations, all of these transfer to the new freehold company. When the leaseholders in a building have different views about how the building should be managed, different levels of engagement with the management responsibility, and different financial positions relative to the maintenance costs they now collectively control, the shared freehold company can become a source of exactly the kind of conflict and management failure that prompted the freehold purchase in the first place. The only difference is that the conflict is now between neighbours rather than between leaseholders and an external freeholder, which in many cases makes it harder to resolve rather than easier. A dispute with an external freeholder can be taken to tribunal, handled by solicitors, and ultimately resolved through a formal process without fundamentally damaging the relationship between the flat owners themselves. A dispute between neighbours who share a freehold company, live in the same building, and see each other regularly is a different kind of conflict, with different social dimensions that formal legal processes don't easily resolve. Problem number 4, the leaseholder who doesn't participate. Collective enfranchisement requires a qualifying majority of leaseholders to participate, but not unanimity, which means some buildings complete a freehold purchase with one or more flat owners choosing not to join the purchase. Those non-participating leaseholders remain as leaseholders, with the freehold company as their new landlord rather than the original freeholder. The new freehold company then has obligations to those non-participating leaseholders, including the obligation to grant lease extensions on reasonable terms, to manage the building in accordance with the existing leases, and to comply with all the statutory obligations that apply to freeholders. Those obligations are exactly the same obligations the previous external freeholder had, and the new freehold company, now staffed by volunteer directors who are also residents, must meet them with equal legal rigour or face the same kind of tribunal challenges that leaseholders used to bring against their previous freeholder.
Problem number 5, the building safety compliance liability that transfers with the freehold. In buildings that have unresolved building safety issues, fire safety defects, cladding remediation requirements, or structural concerns, the freeholder carries specific legal obligations and potential financial liabilities related to those issues. When leaseholders buy the freehold of such a building, they acquire not just the title, but the associated regulatory and financial exposure. A freehold company that now owns a building with outstanding remediation obligations or that is subject to a Building Safety Act notice or enforcement action has taken on liabilities that can significantly exceed the cost of the freehold purchase itself. This is a specific and increasingly important risk in the current building safety environment, and it requires specific due diligence about the building's regulatory status before any freehold purchase completes. The transfer of building safety obligations from an external freeholder to a leaseholder-owned freehold company was never clearly contemplated in the original design of collective enfranchisement, and the interaction between the Leasehold Reform Act and the Building Safety Act creates specific responsibilities for new freeholders that specialist legal advice is required to navigate properly before the purchase completes rather than after. Now here's what connects all 5 of these problems and why freehold purchases go wrong despite leaseholders approaching them with genuine enthusiasm and good intentions. A freehold purchase is a complex commercial property transaction being conducted by people whose primary experience is of residential property ownership, typically with professional advisors who handle the legal and valuation work, but who may not proactively flag every complication in a way that helps the buyers fully understand what they're taking on. The gap between a successfully completed freehold purchase and a smooth, well-managed freehold ownership is not the legal completion itself, but the post-completion governance and management of what you've bought. Completion is the beginning of the responsibility, not the end of the process, and buyers who treat it as a destination rather than the starting point are the ones most likely to discover the problems described above in the months and years after the purchase. There's a specific dynamic worth naming here: the enthusiasm and collective energy that drives a leaseholder group to complete a freehold purchase tends to dissipate quickly once the purchase is done, precisely because the frustration with the previous freeholder that generated the motivation has been removed, and the ongoing administrative responsibility of being the freeholder remains. The group that was united against a common external problem can struggle to maintain the same cohesion when the problem is now the internal management of their own shared asset.
Here's what nobody puts together properly. The leaseholders most enthusiastic about buying their freehold are typically the ones most frustrated with their current management, which is entirely understandable. But frustration with existing management is a poor predictor of competence at self-management, and a building that was badly run by an external freeholder doesn't automatically become well run by a committee of neighbours who have day jobs, different priorities, and no professional property management experience. The skills required to manage a residential building well, understanding building safety obligations, procuring maintenance competitively, setting service charges correctly, managing reserve funds responsibly, and handling the inevitable disputes between residents are specific and learnable, but require deliberate investment that many freehold companies simply don't make, leaving themselves exposed to exactly the same management failures they bought the freehold to escape. The flat owners who successfully self-manage a freehold building are almost always the ones who invested significantly in learning those skills before they needed them, or who appointed a professional managing agent and budgeted properly for that cost from day one, rather than assuming it would be cheaper or easier than paying a managing agent under the previous arrangement. Here's how this plays out for buyers who don't prepare properly. They complete the freehold purchase, hold a celebratory residence meeting, elect directors, and then discover within a year that nobody wants to do the administrative work, that the building's insurance renewal is more complex than they anticipated, that a major works issue has emerged that requires professional management and a reserve fund they haven't built, and that one of the non-participating leaseholders is raising legal challenges about the way their lease is being managed by the new freehold company.
Here's how this plays out for buyers who approach it properly. Before completing the purchase, they commission specific due diligence on the building's regulatory status, the freeholder's title, and any known liabilities that will transfer with the freehold. They agree in advance how the freehold company will be governed, including who will take on the management responsibilities, whether they'll appoint a professional managing agent, and how decisions will be made in cases of disagreement. They budget specifically for a professional managing agent's fees or for the time commitment required is self-managing rather than assuming the management will be free. And they take specific advice on the obligations owed to any non-participating leaseholders before completing, so the post-completion relationship with those owners is understood and planned for rather than discovered reactively when a dispute arises. They also agree a clear process for onboarding the building's management information from the previous freeholder, including historic service charge accounts, insurance records, maintenance logs, and any open disputes or legal proceedings, because that information forms the foundation of competent post-completion management and is sometimes difficult to obtain once the sale has completed and the previous freeholder has no further obligation to cooperate. If you are part of a group of leaseholders considering a freehold purchase, the most important pre-commitment conversations are not about whether to buy, which is often clearly the right decision in principle, but about what you're collectively committing to after the purchase completes. The legal process of buying the freehold is well understood and well supported by specialist solicitors and surveyors. The post-completion governance question, how this group of neighbours will make collective decisions about a shared asset they now own and are legally responsible for, is the question that receives considerably less attention before the purchase and considerably more attention after it, at a point when the answers are harder to change. Buying your freehold can genuinely deliver the autonomy, the savings, and the quality of management that motivated the purchase. The difference between the freehold purchase that delivers those outcomes and the one that creates a new set of problems lies almost entirely in the quality of preparation, due diligence, and post-completion governance planning that was done before the transfer completed, not in the legal mechanics of the purchase itself. The purchase is the easy part. The ownership is what requires the sustained effort, and the groups who treat the two stages with equal seriousness consistently achieve better outcomes than the ones who spend all their energy getting to completion and very little thinking about what happens the morning after.